As fantastic a CFP as Mel O is, and as wonderful an attorney as I am, please do note that anything said in our show are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, and welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, and Zoe and I are excited to be back. Just a reminder for you guys, the way that we're doing the show has changed slightly. We do a lot of research for the show, and we really wanted to make sure that we were not rushing through episodes, and we also wanted to make sure that we were getting as in-depth into a subject as possible. So what will happen is that when we drop an episode, 9 times out of 10, they will be over an hour long, which this one definitely will be. So I will be cutting it up into 2 parts, dropping both parts on the same day so that you can enjoy them all together, or you can listen to them separately depending on your time. And of course, this one is going to be a long one because we are going to discuss gun control. And there has been a lot of more recent mass shootings, seems to be within the last week. And we are going to also talk a little bit about the January 6th insurrection that has also been back in the news. But first, we're going to kick it over to Zoe so that she can start informing us about how other countries have managed and dealt with their gun usage in their country.
Thank you. Well, when we were talking about guns quite recently, Mel asked me, what do other countries think about the gun violence in America? Now, first of all, I think it was nicely encapsulated in a meme that I put on our social media feed recently. And the meme was of a fat Ronald McDonald with an automatic weapon in his hand. I can't remember what the wording was, but words to the effect of how the rest of the world sees America. And there was also an article in the HuffPost at the end of May, which referred to a scathing editorial that was written in France's Le Monde newspaper. And that kind of sums up, I think, what the rest of the world, or, you know, the majority of the rest of the world think about America and the gun craziness. This article, as I said, it was in France's top newspaper, and it described the US as a country that was trapped in madness. It also referred to it as a cycle of despair that keeps on repeating. They commented that after the most recent school shooting in Texas, which we're going to talk about in Uvalde, where 19 children and 2 teachers were killed, they mentioned that, and they also mentioned the Parkland shooting in 2018, and how since both of those things, nothing has changed. They stated that America, the US, they have a notion of American exceptionalism, and that in their opinion that's bullshit. They're quoted as saying, if there is any American exceptionalism, it is to tolerate the fact that schools in the US are regularly transformed into bloody shooting ranges. And Le Monde, the newspaper, laid the blame squarely on the Republican Party for looking the other way. So that was just a kind of timely article that kind of summed up what the vast majority, I think, of the country, of the world thinks when they see reports of yet another mass shooting, especially in a school. So I wanted to talk about how other countries have handled the fallout from mass shootings. And let's start with Australia. Australia confiscated 650,000 guns in the late 90s, following a mass shooting in a cafe in Port Arthur in April 1996. Now, the shooter there killed 35 people and wounded 28. Immediately, Australian Prime Minister, who had just been in office for only 6 weeks, persuaded all sides to agree to sweeping nationwide reform of gun laws. They drafted a national firearms agreement just a month after the shooting, which restricted legal ownership of guns, established a registry of all guns owned in the country, required a permit for all new gun purchases, and implemented a flat-out ban on certain guns like semi-automatic rifles and shotguns. Now, it also instituted a mandatory buyback of such guns like that were legally owned, and they paid the fair market value to the owners who would give them up. And they set up a legal amnesty for any illegally owned guns. Obviously, the people weren't compensated for those, but there was an amnesty. There was going to be no prosecution if they just handed them in. And as I said earlier, about 650,000 guns were peacefully seized and destroyed. and that was about the equivalent about 20% of all privately owned in Australia. Now that was one of the world's largest mandatory gun buybacks, and it was a huge success. Murder and suicide rates, because I think we perhaps lose sight when we hear of these mass shootings that guns are to blame for an awful lot of suicides in this country and around the world. So the murder and suicide rates plummeted. Murder by guns was down by 42%, and suicide by gun was down by 57%. Now, to be fair, homicides were decreasing even prior to the buyback, so it's hard to pinpoint the exact impact that the buyback had, but the study found that the National Firearms Agreement definitely did cause reductions in firearms, suicide, mass shootings, and female homicides, the majority of which are conducted by guns. And the mass shootings went down from 13 in the 18 years before Port Arthur, and just 1 afterwards. So that's Australia. And of course there are arguments about it's not apples to apples to equate the US to smaller countries like that, but it still is worth talking about. Now in Scotland, which is a country in the United Kingdom, there was a school shooting in Dunblane in 1996, and I remember that, I was still living there then, and a gunman killed 16 primary school students, so they were 5 to 6 years old, and their teacher. And as a result, mostly of grassroots action, laws were changed in Great Britain relatively quickly to ban the private ownership of most handguns, and gun violence in Britain is now one of the lowest in the world, and there have been no more school shootings since 1996. Listen to that, no more since 1996. There has been one more mass shooting in 2010 in Cumbria where 12 people were killed, but that's one. Here you have mass shootings all the time, every single day. The UK had previously banned semi-automatic weapons and instituted a mandatory registration for shotgun owners after a previous massacre in 1987 in Hungerford, where a guy went on the rampage in a small village there and he killed 16 adults and 15 others were injured. And they also instituted a $150 million buyback scheme. Now, the UK's annual rate of gun deaths is 0.2 per 100,000 in 2015, compared to 12.09 per 100,000 in 2017 in the US. So 0.2 to 12.09, comparing the UK to the US. And in 2017, the UK had 5.03 guns for every 100 people, and the US had 120.5 guns per 100 people. That's just, it's crazy. Now, even more recently, back in the UK, they've just had a 2-week firearm surrender, which every police force in the UK was involved in. In Greater Manchester alone, 150 guns were taken off the streets, including a sawn-off shotgun, and there's been a 30% reduction in gun discharges there in Greater Manchester since May 2021. Now, 150 guns doesn't seem a lot, but Greater Manchester is just a county within the United Kingdom. So it's, compared to the US, it's a relatively small geographical space, and they've successfully got guns off the street and got the number of gun discharges down significantly. And in another neighbouring county, 114 guns were collected. So again, small numbers, but it's a small geographical space compared to America. Now, to be fair, banning guns is not the only answer. In China, they have some of the strictest gun control measures in the world. And on the very same day that Sandy Hook took place, there was a knife attack at an elementary school in China, in which 3 children and an elderly woman were injured. So there is always going to be violence, but I think we can all agree that the difference in the level of carnage that can be caused by someone wielding a knife compared to someone wielding an automatic weapon, it's huge. Now, in a recent article on the BBC website at the end of May, we're going to turn to Canada now, it was reported that Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had stated that Canada should introduce a total ban on buying and selling handguns. They're proposing a new law that would not freeze private ownership of handguns, but it would make it illegal to buy them. He introduced a bill at the end of May which makes it impossible to buy, sell, transfer or import handguns anywhere in the country. And Trudeau was quoted as saying, other than using firearms for sport shooting and hunting, there is no reason anyone in Canada should need guns in their everyday lives. And the bill that he's proposed would also take away firearms licenses from gun owners who had been involved in domestic violence or criminal harassment. Now, Canada's laws are already much more limited to the US. All guns have to be kept locked and unloaded. There are extensive background checks for anyone wishing to buy a firearm. But even so, Canada is called to make the restrictions even tighter. And this was following several deadly shootings, including one that you probably heard about in April, where a gunman posing as a police officer killed 22 people during a shooting spree in Nova Scotia. So that's just a brief outlook on how other countries have handled it and how quickly they have handled it after mass shootings. And as the articles have suggested, banning guns all by itself or restricting the ownership of guns isn't the answer. There are many other things that would have to be in place as well, and I think Mel's going to touch on some of those and the state of American gun law right now.
Okay, so as we had mentioned before, we have seen a ton of violence. Recently, we've had the Buffalo, New York shooting in the grocery store that was considered a hate crime. We've obviously had the school shooting in Texas, not to mention the very many years that we've had of other mass shootings. And I will tell you guys that you're going to hear as I go through my notes that I'm constantly disclaiming stuff. Out of everything we've researched on the show, and this is our 380th episode, I think it's going to be. Out of everything that we've researched, this by far is the most convoluted misinformation, this contradicting that, contradicting this. I have never done so much research than I have ever done on this topic. As a matter of fact, Zoe and I were trying to record this episode for like a week and a half. And every time I'd research, I'm like, wait, I got to research something else. And like, now I got to research something else. So when you guys look at the resources, understand that the numbers I'm going to give you, I went to the links where they got those resources, and I disclosed those resources too, to make sure that they were correct facts and that it just wasn't some, crazy shit. And I will tell you that before I researched this, I was 100% for a gun ban. Now, I have a CCW and I own a gun. Zoe does not own a gun and does not have a CCW. But to be fair, we have shot guns together, Zoe. So
yeah, that was I can tell you I have shot a gun twice in my life, but I will not and would never allow there to be a gun in my home.
So again, your hosts are on two sides of the fence, but that is not saying that I'm not for gun reform. But I will tell you, after the information that I have found, I no longer believe in banning guns. And I will explain all of the reasons why once we get through this. But I would really, and I say this a lot, but before we get into the numbers, I'm going to remind you one more time. I don't want you guys to think like how Zoe and I think. Okay? We do the research and then we disclose our resources so that you can do your own fucking research. So it's not that I want you to listen to this and either, my side backs what you think or Zoe's side backs what you think. I want you guys to just go, okay, this is what we found. Here's the resources that we found it out. Now you do your own research and you decide what it is that you want to do. So we're going to get into this, and this is pretty heavy, and my part is going to be really long because I have a ton of facts and figures and numbers and a whole bunch of different issues. So let's get into just some gun information. And again, I will tell you that there is so much bad information on guns out there. It is utterly ridiculous. So, and even though I have a CCW and I do own a gun, I was 100% for turning in my gun. If there was a gun ban, I was like totally okay. I'm all for it. That's fine. Whatever we got to do. Now I've completely changed my mind again, which is the reason why I love doing this show. So all of these resources are released, and let's just start getting into some numbers. These are up-to-date numbers. So there's been 27 school shootings this year and 119 school shootings since 2018. There is 100 people that die from guns in the US every single day. There is 12 children who die every day from gun violence in the United States. There's been 950 school shootings since Sandy Hook, which was December 14th of 2012, including the shootings from 2022. The peak ages for violent offenders with a firearm are 18 to 21, and we've seen a lot of the mass shooters fall within that age range. The National Rifle Association in 2018 estimated that there was 8 million AR-15s in circulation in the United States, not handguns. AR-15 style weapons, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that is and what that does here in a minute. And these are numbers coming out of the NRA. And we're going to talk a little bit about who the NRA here in a minute. 9 in 10 people who attempt suicide with a gun will succeed. 98% of mass shooters are men. 89% of gun owners do favor preventing mentally ill people from having access to purchasing guns, but we're going to talk a little bit about that here in a minute. 77% of gun owners do favor background checks for private sales and for gun shows. And so again, we're going to talk about a little bit of a discrepancy that's going on with that. 54% of gun deaths are suicides and 43% are murders. Now, when we start talking about the statistics and the lives involved in gun violence, you have to, not that mass shootings are not bad, but I was actually very surprised at that statistic, because every time they talk about gun deaths, I assume that they're gun deaths that are at no fault of the person. And in actuality, the predominant number of gun deaths are actually suicide. And we have not covered suicide or euthanasia on the show, but I think it would be very interesting to get into it. What do you think about euthanasia, Zoe?
I think in heavily regulated formats, I'm for it.
And I think you should be able to take your life whenever you want to. So
right, but that's a very different. It's kind of hard to lump euthanasia and suicide together because that's very different to suicide. Yeah,
they're two different. They're definitely different standards of circumstances. So for sure. So we will stay tuned for that because we'll be looking at that. 79% of all murders involve a firearm, and less than 1% of people defend themselves with their guns in the event of a violent crime. Now, from 2016 to 2020, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and now Explosives determined that gun manufacturers have produced 24.6 million handguns, 14.3 million rifles, and 7.9 million other various firearms, including shotguns. And this is up substantially from the period that they were comparing this to from 2007 till 2011. So of course we are a capitalist society in the United States, and gun makers are no different, and so they have been ramping up production. Now, according to the Gun Violence Archive, since 2014, the archive has counted more than 34,500 children killed or injured in shooting incidences, and more than 6,500 of them were under the age of 12. Now, since 2019, more than 4,500 children have been shot to death, and that is a total roughly equivalent to the U.S. fatalities in the 17 years of the Iraq War. However, that number includes the deaths of children from mass shootings. And I'm not saying that sounds callous, but when you guys are hearing these facts, you need to, this is why I did so much research, because you need to understand where the numbers are coming from, because people can make numbers say anything. And so you want to make sure that the data you're getting, you're comparing it to things and you're qualifying it to the best of your ability. And about 1 in 11 Americans own at least 5 guns. So, yeah, I mean, we have, like, put that into perspective. I mean, obviously guns are much smaller, but, 5 cars, 5 sweaters, 5, I don't know, pairs of black heels. Well, maybe if you're a woman. So now, before we get any farther into this, we're going to go through a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to go through some gun terminology. We're going to go through the understanding a little bit why the gun laws are so challenging to change. And I've tried to organize it as best I can. So let's get into this, and then Zoe might have interjections as we move through. So let's talk about just some general gun terminology. So there's handguns, which I think we all know what a handgun is. And then there's long guns, which are rifles, and AR-15 style weapons. And we see that these weapons have been the ones that have predominantly been the weapons of choice for purveyors of mass shootings. A round is a bullet. A magazine is what holds the bullet. An automatic weapon continuously fires bullets with just holding down the trigger, okay? And they are banned, with air quotes, they're banned in the United States. However, as you'll find out, you actually can get a legal automatic weapon in the United States. If the automatic rifle was made before 1986, States, then it is grandfathered in and it is still allowed to be bought, sold, or exchanged as any other type of gun would be. So according to federal data from 2017, there is an estimated 630,000 automatic rifles still circulating in the United States. So when we're talking about AR-15 style rifles, those are semi-automatic, but we're talking about what you would classify as a machine gun. So there is still 630,000 automatic machine gun type rifles that are circulating within the United States as of 2017. Now, you can in fact, as a private citizen, you can still purchase and own an automatic rifle. Now, typically you're going to have to, obviously you're going to have to pay for it, and it could be anywhere north of $15,000 or considerably higher. You also have to pay a $200 tax stamp. The gun has got to be older than 1986. So it has to be made in 1986 or older in order for it to be grandfathered in. And the purchaser cannot be a prohibited person, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And the relevant state law, whatever state they reside in, has to make sure that they do not ban these automatic rifles. And this is where things get really fucking nasty when we're talking about the lack of federal oversight with the states. And this is what we're seeing as a part of the massive problem that we're having with guns, which is why I think a gun ban is probably not realistic, but gun reform, there's definitely, as to Zoe's point, there's different things that we can do. So if the state law, if the state that you're in doesn't automatically straight out ban automatic weapons, you can also own one of those. And of course, supplies are limited because they have banned the making of new automatic weapons, but you can still purchase ones that are 1986 or older, assuming that obviously they are still working. Semi-automatic, that is where you have to keep pulling the trigger in order to fire a round. So each time you want to take off a shot, you have to hit the trigger. Bump stocks, which are currently banned, but this is, you guys will find out that it's pretty amazing the way they did it. So a bump stock, this was used in the Route 91 festival here in Vegas, which killed over 58 people, so anywhere from 58 to 60 people, depending on who you include in that, on October 1st of 2017. And we talked about what it was like to be in Las Vegas immediately following that shooting in episode number 6, and then we re-released it for the anniversary in episode number 32. And a bump stock uses the recoil of the gun to mimic an automatic weapon. So bump stocks, as of December 2018, were considered a machine gun under the National Firearms Act. So we're going to be talking about that later too. And as of March 26th of 2019, all bump stocks had to be turned in by owners, or they had to be destroyed by the owners themselves. So the federal government banned bump stock and then told people, hey, you can turn it in or just, destroy them yourself.
Just throw it away.
Yeah.
You don't mind.
Yeah, we'll trust
you.
We trust you. Yeah, it's totally cool. So February 20th of 2018, President Trump issued a memorandum instructing the Attorney General to, quote, dedicate all available resources to propose for notice and comment a rule banning all devices that turn legal weapons into machine guns. And again, based on the National Firearms Act, a machine gun is considered illegal. And in response to this, the National Firearms Act was amended, as well as the Gun Control Act was amended, and made the decision clear that bump stocks were considered under the law, quote, machine guns, and that any bump stocks or type devices that harness the recoil energy to turn a semi-automatic weapon in to mimic a automatic weapon were banned and are illegal. Unless, of course, you still have the bump stocks that you didn't really destroy and they're somewhere in your house. But I'm sure nobody did that.
No, I'm sure everyone did.
Yeah.
God, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just talk a little bit about the anatomy of a gun. So you have the stock of the gun, which is the back support of the gun. So this would be the flat part that goes against your chest that you use to brace when you're taking off a shot. It gives structural support to the barrel and the action part and the firing mechanism of the actual gun itself. Then you have the barrel of the gun, which is the tube, where people say, you're looking down a barrel of a gun. That's obviously what they're referring to. And then you have the action part of the gun, which is all the moving parts of the gun. And so when a round is fired and ejected, this is everything that is happening at the time. Now, this is really important, and this is going to be the first disclaimer I'm going to give you on this. I had to look at because I just wanted to be as accurate as possible. I looked at 4 different articles to just see the parts of the gun and what they did. Now, granted, there's a lot of different types of guns out there, but these 4 articles did not agree on what the parts of the gun did. Okay? So if I have people and I go, hey, look, if you can how does a lawnmower work, right? There's going to have parts that I think it's going to be pretty self-explanatory. But this is just the tip of the misinformation that was out with guns. And again, and I have every single resource that I used. I have over 40 resources easy, plus the resources that Zoe has. And so again, if there is there might be a possibility that I can't even put all the resources listed on there. So I will have to find a different way to get them all listed for you guys, just so if you have the inkling, you can do this individual research for yourself. This topic gets muddy very quickly, and it's fucking nasty. So let's talk about who cannot own a gun, according to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. So there's a couple, a listing here, so let's go through it. If you have been convicted in any court of a crime punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year. However, other resources say that if the person was indicted, they would also qualify for this, even if in fact they did not serve time. So if they are indicted for a crime which would be punishable in prison by over a year, they would technically not be able to buy a gun based on some sources, but not a problem based on other sources. This is the simplest thing people cannot fucking agree on. Obviously, if you're a felon, no, you can't own a gun. If you're a fugitive from justice, no, you can't own a gun.
Obviously you can't, and I'm sure they don't.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing like trusting a fugitive. If you have been adjudicated, if you have been found to have a mental defect or have been committed to a mental institution, that would bar you from gun ownership. If you are an illegal alien or unlawfully in the United States, or an alien admitted to the United States under a non-immigrant visa, you are not allowed to possess a firearm. If you have been discharged from the U.S. military armed forces with dishonorable conditions, you are not allowed to own a firearm anymore. If you have been a citizen of the United States, but you have renounced your citizenship, you cannot be a gun owner. If the person is subject to a court order that restrains the person from harassing, stalking, or threatening an intimate partner or child of such intimate partner, then issued after hearing, then of course you cannot possess a gun. And if you have been convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, you cannot lawfully receive, possess, ship, or transport a firearm or ammunition, and you are prohibited from shipping, transporting, possessing, and receiving firearms and ammunition. So you can't send it, you can't receive it, you can't touch it at all. A person who is under indictment, those are the things that make it, based on federal law, current federal law, that you cannot own a gun. So let's talk a little bit about the supremacy clause, because this is a big deal, and this will explain a little bit why the gun laws in the United States are so fucking fucked up. So Article 6, Paragraph 2 of the United States Constitution is commonly referred to as the Supremacy Clause, and it establishes that the federal Constitution and federal law generally takes precedent over state law and even state constitutions. It can prohibit states from interfering with the federal government's exercise of its constitutional powers and from assuming any functions that are exclusively entrusted to the federal government. It does not, however, allow the federal government to review or veto state laws before they have been taken effect. And then, of course, the United States Supreme Court can come in and they can view a law to be unconstitutional, Roe versus Wade. We'll see what happens with that next month, but Zoe and I are not optimistic about that. So lack of federal law means that states are basically on their own when they're making gun laws. And as a result of that, what we see is some states are very conservative in their perception of guns, and we see that some states are very lax when it comes to gun law. So without clear federal governance over guns, we see that some states require permits or licenses to own guns and others don't. We see differing ages for buying long guns. So some states say you have to be 21 to purchase a firearm regardless. Other states say that you have to be 21 to buy a handgun, but you don't have to buy a rifle. Other people say you can buy a rifle at 18, but you have to get a hunting license first. You guys, when you really get into the weeds and you put the time and effort into researching the subject that I did, there's so much shit out here that's going to blow your fucking mind. Some states have mandatory gun safety training, including how to store and protect your guns from theft, and some do not. Some states, you can have open carry, and you can do that with a permit, and then some say you don't have to have a permit to be able to open carry. all states allow for concealed carry with differing degrees of requirements, and that is also sometimes referred to as constitutional carry, which we're going to get into here in a second, because that is one of the legal things that starts tying up a lot of the gun regulation and the modification. And it would be interesting with what Zoe had talked about, how the one who was at New Zealand, he had been in for 6 weeks and he banned Australia and he banned guns. I'm not familiar with Australia's government, but it would be very interesting to see how he was able to do that, because I'm assuming Australia has a constitution, as I'm sure most countries do, and so I would be really interested in that. But this causes a problem with guns coming in from other states and being used in crimes there. And so there is an article that I have in there that I believe was from the New York Times, where is it a state of the United States, and you can go to your city or your state and you can see where the guns, what other states' guns are coming into your state from. And it's a really cool interactive map, you guys. And I was just like sitting there playing with it forever because it was just so fucking cool. The amount of data these people had to pull in order to make that simple little chart. And I would highly recommend that you guys look at it. And like I said, I do believe it was the New York Times, a New York Times article. There is also no mandatory obligation to have any proficiency with your weapon. Some states require that you have to have proficiency, some states don't. So you could have something that's deadly and could kill people and not even know how to use the fucking thing. And I want to remind you that you need to have a license to drive a car. So keep that in perspective. You can't drive a car because it's dangerous without a license, but there is multiple states out there where you don't have to have a permit or a license, and you don't have to have any proficiency with your weapon at all. There's also no set standard of how to safely store your guns, protecting them against theft or accidental gun death. So we don't have any mandate. So we talked about on one of the episodes, and I think it was the artificial intelligence episode, where we were talking about Teslas. We were talking about cars that were using artificial intelligence, and how all of the safety standards for cars have been based on driving a standard car, where you get in the car, you're behind the wheel, you're making it go, you're controlling the engine. Well, now that we have Teslas and we have artificial intelligence driving our cars, the standards are trying to catch up with it, right? And so this is kind of what we're seeing here, is that there's nothing from the federal government to give guidance of any kind. So we don't even have kind of a general rule of thumb, like, hey, if you have XYZ, it needs to go in this type of thing with XYZ. Our government has been impotent in even putting together those smallest amount of details, which is not banning guns, by the way. And part of that is because the NRA comes in and lobbies, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So why can't the Fed just change the gun laws? Well, because every time a president issues an executive order, it can just be easily undone by the next administration. That's how our government is set up. And if Congress tries to overturn an executive order by passing a bill that blocks it, but then the president can still veto that bill. And then Congress would need to override the veto of the bill. And basically, as you can see, if you're a United States citizen, that our government can't fucking do anything with anything between the two parties. They are too old, and they need to get the fuck out. As far as I'm concerned, everybody needs to be, and I am a Democrat and I support Biden, but Biden is too old, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, Kamala, come on, let's have Kamala. That's who I want.
I'm just saying, at this point, can we just stop electing people that are in their 70s? Yeah. I mean, I love
old white guys.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love my grandfather. Would I want him to be president? Absolutely fucking not. Right. Okay. Now, there's already an estimated over 400 million guns in the U.S. already. So for us trying to ban all of them would be, I feel, an almost impossible task, because look at it when you're talking about just the bump stock. So if we're going to have a bump stock, we're going to be like, hey, turn it in or don't, or destroy it yourself. So we have 400 million guns circulating in the United States. And even if we did put a full gun ban on, regardless of how you feel about guns, do you think that we're going to be able to pull all of them out? Absolutely not. It's just not going to happen. So I was very curious about the Second Amendment. So as I was going through this, I'm like, let me educate myself completely on guns, because I got a CCW because I wanted to be comfortable with the gun. I wanted to understand how to fire the gun. And more importantly, if I found that I had to use the gun, I did not want to be in a situation where I was uncomfortable and that I didn't have enough balls to use the gun. So I went and I did the CCW and I did all of the training. But I knew zilch on gun research and gun law. And I'm sure there's still a whole bunch of stuff I don't know, but I literally knew nothing. So this is me building the entire gun laws from the ground up as much as possible. So I started thinking about the Second Amendment because that's what everybody's like, you can't change the Second Amendment, okay? So what the fuck does the Second Amendment say? Well, this is what it says, quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, end quote. That is the Second Amendment to the Constitution. And what we see is that most people associate owning a gun as being completely tied to their personal freedom, but after July, I can't get an abortion. Yeah. Right? So this is what we find, is we find that, nope, this is granted to us under the Constitution, this is a personal thing, and et cetera, but then those same people who are pro-gun have no problem 9 times out of 10 in coming in and telling a woman what she can and can't do with her body, and that is the fucking dichotomy of America. And in 2017, according to the Pew Research Center, about half of white men, 48%, say they own a gun. By comparison, about a quarter of white women and non-white men, 24% each, own guns, along with 16% of non-white women. And according to the Violence Project, which has data that they collect also, shows that white men are disproportionately responsible for mass shootings more than any other group. And I'm not fucking blowing your mind there. I mean, look at any news coverage. And, they just released today, Zoe and I, literally before we started recording, they just released today, well, they didn't release it today, they just showed yesterday the January 6th committee, and the video that was presented for the January 6th Capitol riot is now on YouTube. And I highly recommend you guys look at it. And it occurred to me that we know that people were packing in that riot. We know that people were armed. There's been multiple people that have said that they were armed, some of them saying they didn't have guns, but they had mace and, whatever. But I don't know how nobody opened fire, like open fire. Because if you watch that footage, it is fucking scary. And hearing them hang Mike Pence, I mean, that just makes my blood run cold. I don't care, even if you were screaming, hang Donald Trump. Like, that is some terrifying shit, you guys. And we've mentioned this, and I'm sure other people would agree and understand as we've done the research on this show. Again, if that had been black and brown people that were raiding the Capitol, there's absolutely no way that A, they would not have had more enforcements, and B, they would not have opened fire and killed multiple people. That's just my opinion.
Oh, I think there isn't a shadow of a doubt that that's what would have happened.
And it's frightening, you guys. Like, you need to watch it. It's 12 minutes and 36 seconds long. It's on YouTube. It is fucking frightening.
It is. I mean, Mel showed it to me before we started the podcast, and it is just, I didn't understand the magnitude of the people that were there, the ferocity of the mob, and anyone who says that was a peaceful protest is talking out their arse. And it was fucking frightening, and it wasn't a peaceful protest. They smashed windows to get in. They beat the shit out of police officers. It was a disgrace. And like Mel said, if they had been blacks or browns or any other color than these white MAGA fuckwits, they would have shot them all down.
They would have easily done it. And you guys really do need to watch it. And it has overlays with, you can see the body cams from some of the riot officers, as well as hear their panics calling back and forth and begging for backup and not receiving any of it. Anyway, that's just a side note. We got a lot of stuff that's happened since the last time we recorded. So the reason why banning guns and guns are such a complicated issue in America is because we can't even fucking define what a mass shooting is. So if you don't have common language to talk about a problem, then it makes it very hard to come to a said solution to the problem, especially if you have political parties who are at each other's throats and, quite frankly, not really serving what I feel is in the best. And this is not just guns, this is anything. I mean, I think it's not a far reach if everybody is just sick and tired of our Republicans and Democrats fighting and not doing anything for the people. So mass shooting definition, we don't even have one. This is the multiple different types of mass shooting definitions we have. So there's no single agreed upon definition for mass shootings. So they can vary depending on the number of victims or the circumstances of the shooting. So the FBI has what they call an active shooter incident, okay, where they collect data on, and it is defined as, quote, one or more individuals actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area, end quote. So that's the FBI's definition of mass shootings, but it's called active shooter incidents. Then the Gun Violence Archive, that has an online database of gun violence incidents in the United States, defines mass shootings as incidences in which 4 or more people are shot, even if no one was killed, excluding the shooter. So if you have somebody who comes in and shoots their entire family of 4 or more people, even if nobody dies, that's technically considered a mass shooting, according to the Gun Violence Archive. And then regardless of the definition, fatalities in mass shootings in incidences in the United States only represent a small fraction of gun murders that occur nationwide. So we have the biggest amount of deaths coming from suicide. Then we have mass shootings of the other murders still being a very small part of the overall gun deaths. But if we had an actual terminology that everybody could agree on, I'm sure that number would get a lot easier to define. And this is one of the reasons, again, while if you really take the time to research the subject, you're going to realize that what you thought, you don't fucking know. I'm telling you, because anybody can make numbers say anything. So let's talk about the National Rifle Association. So the NRA was founded November 17th of 1871, ironically in New York, New York, which is not a very gun-friendly state now, which I found completely ironic. They are a major laboring power in the United States, and they contribute a lot of money to campaigns, as well as various other lobbying groups do. And I do have a resource in there that talks about how much they donate to campaigns. But the reason why I'm not bringing it up is because I did not have the time or the fortitude to dig into the other groups that give to, because obviously the NRA predominantly gives to Republicans, and there's other organizations that predominantly give to Democrats, and I didn't want to make it lopsided, so I left that figure out. But look at the resource, because it's a fuck ton of money. And in 2018, the NRA, again, by their standard, estimated that there was 8 million AR type rifles being circulated, and they said that the AR was so popular that it should actually stand for America's Rifle, which made me sick.
Yeah, I mean, let's be so proud of ourselves. Hey,
America's
Rifle.
I mean, that's what we want to be, known for. Yeah. But that just made me so sick, because we'd had tons of mass shootings up until 2018, and instead of saying anything like, yeah, there's 8 million AR style rifles out there, and it's so popular we should call it America's Rifle, because that's what I want to be fucking associated with as an American. That really made me sick. So the NRA has been accused of in the past for lobbying supportive bills that take money away from or prevent the study into gun-related violence, specifically in the 90s, and they continue to use their lobbying power to control the narrative on conversations about guns. Now, many times their platform on the issue has, by going after and banning gun research, has been the fact that they say, hey, if if they start doing research into guns, they're going to come and try to take your guns. So what we have complete lack of definitions. We have complete lack of gun reform in this country. And then we have the NRA blocking gun research. So maybe if we did finally have a way that we could get some good terminology together, so that we could start putting a kind of a shell around this, that we can start getting really good numbers, maybe some of these numbers would change, and maybe they wouldn't look as bad as they do, or maybe they'd look worse. But the bottom line is that we'll never know, because the NRA is so powerful that they continue to block any type of gun research. And like I said, specifically in the 90s, and the resources in there, and you can go back and look at that. And so this just goes back to what a clusterfuck this thing is. Now, former Governor Rick Scott signed into bill into law in Florida, saying that you had to be at least 21 years old to buy a long gun in Florida after the murder of 17 people at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Now the NRA, so there was a mass shooting in Florida, again, AR-15 style weapon. Governor Rick Scott steps in and says, that's it. In my state, everybody has to be 21 in order to buy a long gun or a handgun. And the NRA went in and they challenged it in court to repeal the law. And they said, quote, and this is fucking ridiculous. This is what they said, quote, the ban, meaning that the ban of an 18 to a 20-year-old person from not being able to buy a rifle. The ban infringes on the rights of all 18 to 20-year-olds to purchase firearms for the exercise of their Second Amendment rights, even for self-defense in the home. And they argued this in a court filing. And then it says, quote, the ban just does not limit these rights, it obliterates it. And they lost. Okay, but the point is that we're going to talk a little bit about what the federal regulations have and everything. And I just read to you guys what the Second Amendment was. So I don't know how many people have grabbed their guns to join a militia lately. I guess if you were in the January 6th protest, Capitol riot, you did. But I just thought, man, I can't believe that a lot of this is based on just such outdated wording that clearly was not designed for the intent that it has. That being said, I still don't think we should ban guns. But Governor Rick Scott is now a senator, and you don't have to worry because he's flipped once again. And even though the law is still active in the state of Florida that you have to be over 21 years old to buy any gun in Florida, he has recently said, literally within 3 days before we're recording this, that he thinks that the federal law, because remember the supremacy clause, the federal law overrides state law, that the federal government, now he's a senator now, okay, the federal government should not regulate guns at all because the state should do it because he said, quote, you can change the laws easier at the state level, end quote. And when he was asked if there would be a compromise that would be possible between Republicans and Democrats, he was quoted as saying, I'll listen, but I am not taking away guns from law-abiding Americans, end quote. So apparently when he was governor, it was a big enough idea. But now that he's actually in a place where he could really do something, he does not want the federal government to get involved. And this is the problem that we keep seeing because of the lack of federal oversight. So let's talk about what are the current gun regulations. So you must be 21 years or older to buy a handgun, period. Okay? And you have to not be a prohibited person, which we already went over who those are. Under the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, federal law requires licensed gun dealers to conduct a background check prior to completing the sale of a gun in order to ensure that the prospective purchaser is not disqualified from owning a gun under the federal law. However, background checks matter primarily on who is selling the gun. So, we've heard Biden's comments and we've heard other where they talked about the gun show loophole, where if there's a private seller that's at a gun show, they don't have to do a background check. And then, of course, if you have a federally licensed firearm dealer at a gun show, they do have to do a background check. However, to be fair, I have come across in research that most gun shows, everybody does background checks regardless. And this would be if they're at a gun show or if it's a brick and mortar store or even if it's online. So let's talk about background checks real quick. The federal law states that everybody needs a background check to get a gun if you are buying it from a federally licensed merchant, which we just talked about. However, you can do this in a variety of ways. So as we just mentioned, you can conduct background checks through the FBI, through their National Instant Criminal Background Check systems. And since they've started doing this since 1994, the NICS has stopped 3 million sales of guns to prohibited purchasers. Now, typically, when there's a background check that's ran with NICS, a decision comes back within minutes. However, sometimes it can take a little bit longer. So we're going to talk about guns and COVID here in a second, where they had limited people working, and we see that gun sales shot up. And so what happens is that the federal government is given 3 business days in order to return a decision on a background check. And if in the event that within 3 business days, the FBI cannot send back a yes or no answer on the background check, it is at the discretion of the seller if they want to proceed with the sale. This is also known as a default proceed sale. Okay. And so you can do it that way, or you can, in certain states, the states take responsibility for their own background checks, known as point of contact states. And in that state, in those instances, the state law enforcement agencies conducts their own checks. Now, so when you're doing research pro or against the whole gun thing, I came across articles, and the resources are in there, where they said, oh, 21 states don't do background checks. And I came across that and I was like, what? Wait a minute. What? That doesn't make any sense. It's a federal law. We've already established that. But then when you dig into it, after 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 more articles, you find that the 21 states they're referring to do their own background checks through their state and for law enforcement. But both sides mislead. Both sides mislead. That is what the problem is that both sides are trying to sway your vote or trying to sway your perception. So in this article, it states that 21 states do not do background checks. And then once you do the research, you find no, that they in specific just don't do the checks through the FBI. That's all. And so there's misinformation on both sides. And this is why whatever you think you know about the gun conversation, I guarantee you don't know all of the moving parts that are going on, because I had absolutely no idea. And let me tell you guys, I am no by means an expert on this, but I have put 6 to 8 hours in researching this topic, and you will see that from my resource links. So in a small number of cases, the system is unable to make an immediate determination, like I mentioned before. So they have 3 business days to do that. And if they don't, and it falls under a default proceed sale, that is where the gun seller has the ability that they can decide if they think this person is trustworthy enough to own a gun. The default proceed sales are commonly referred to as the Charleston loophole, because it was this that allowed the shooter in 2015 to kill all of the people at the Bible study in Charleston, South Carolina, at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. And so the perpetrator was a white supremacist who killed 9 African Americans after he had previously joined them for Bible study. And it was this exact default proceed sale that allowed him to get access to a gun that, had the background check came back within the 3 business days, that he of course would have been denied. And in 2018, 4,240 background checks were denied after 3 days, after the 3-day investigation period lapsed, and they are referred to as delayed denials. And that allowed purchases of about 3,960 guns to proceed in those cases. And I'm not for or against, I'm just letting you guys know these are the numbers. So in the grand scheme of the amount of guns that are in the United States, this is a minuscule number, but it is important for you guys to understand that this does happen. And 4,000 guns is still a big deal. It's just not a big deal when you compare it to the amount of outstanding guns in the United States. Now, there is no longer a federal cooling off period. It used to be back in the day that you bought a gun and you had, a 5 to 7 day cooling off period, but now there is no federal cooling off period. However, there are states, again, this is where we have gun laws differing from every state. California, Florida, Hawaii, Illinois, Rhode Island, and Washington, D.C. do have waiting periods for purchasing on all different types of weapons, ranging anywhere from 3 days to 14 days. So this is where we're having some states do, some states don't. And we already know that states do travel across gun lines.
And just to interject, you're talking about the cool off period?
Mm-hmm.
That is very important in terms of suicides as well. That's what I've read in my research, that given that, as you said, the majority of gun deaths are from suicide, having that cool down period for people who are suicidal is very important, because if you are feeling that way and you have access to something that is, what did you say, 9 times out of 10 going to kill you, if you had a little bit of cool down time, it could make the difference for you seeking help or changing your mind. So I just wanted to interject that.
Yeah, and that's something I didn't cover because I wasn't thinking of that, but no, she's completely right on that. Now, in regards to the state cooling down period, again, we have Minnesota and Washington impose waiting times for handguns and rifles. So it's not just handguns, it's just across the board. And Maryland and New Jersey have waiting periods only for handguns. And so this is where, again, we see that the states are very convoluted in the way that they approach gun laws, which is the reason why we have shit so confusing, that we have 50 fucking states all trying to do their own thing, and we have people in the House and the Senate who won't get off their fucking ass to try to do anything to protect anyone. And I'm talking about protecting gun owners too. There is a middle ground if we can even fucking get to the middle of the field to talk about it. And I was so disgusted as I was doing this at both sides. It just made me want to get rid of all of them. So we talked a little bit about constitutional carry. So let me just read these two to you, because this is very important, because a lot of times you hear this referred to when you're talking about state gun laws. So constitutional carry means that the state's law does not prohibit citizens who can legally possess a firearm from carrying handguns. This is openly or in a concealed manner, and thus no state permit is required. All right. Then there's permitless carry. Permitless carry includes constitutional carry states, as well as states where an individual must meet certain qualifications, like, for example, no DUIs in the past 10 years in order to legally carry. Now, currently, states with permitless carry laws are Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Idaho, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming. And 6 states have increased the minimum purchase for long gun purchases from 18 to 21, according to, this is data according to the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. And those states are Florida, Washington State, Vermont, California. However, we're going to come back to that, Illinois, and Hawaii. Now, California, their law was declared partially unconstitutional, and now requests that adults under 21 obtain a hunting license before they buy a long gun. So even in the state level, when they tried to put a 21 or older purchase of all guns, parts of the law was considered to be unconstitutional. Now, the majority of the six states that I just mentioned raised the amount of the age requirement to purchase a long gun after the 2018 Parkland, Florida shooting. And currently, New York and Utah are looking to increase the long gun purchase age to 21 after the most recent shooting in Texas. So a random fact, Texas gun law historians say that long guns were excluded from gun restrictions in Texas because they were used for hunting or joining a militia and weren't viewed as being able to be used in a crime as comparison to a handgun. And again, there's that word militia, and I just thought that was just fascinating that keeps coming up over and over again. And so after mass shootings, though, we find that the trend in government seems to be to loosen gun laws instead of tighten them. And there's resources in there that you can see that it's just fucking crazy. States with the highest amount of guns per capita, so this would be per population, are in order, and I'm just going to round up the numbers because I don't need to get this detailed into it. Number 1, Texas at over 588,000, California 344,000, Florida 343,000, Virginia 307,000, Pennsylvania 236,000, Georgia 190,000, Arizona 179,000, Ohio 173,000, Alabama at 161,000, and North Carolina at 152,000. Now, when we went into COVID, we saw that purchases of guns went through the roof. And this is the reason why I'm even talking about this, is because when we're talking about no cooling off period and all of the other things that we just talked about, when people panic, at least it seems Americans, when they panic, they buy guns. And if you remember way back in the day in 2020, grocery stores were out of food. So a lot of us, including myself, for the first time in our lives, saw grocery store shelves completely empty, which I've never seen in my entire life and never thought I would. And there was much panic that was happening. So the FBI stated that nearly 2 million guns were sold in March 2020 alone. And in April 2020, they saw 1.6 million guns sold. And in June of 2020, they saw an estimated 2.3 million guns sold. Now remember that at the time COVID's happening, people are panicking and buying guns, and there's less people on staff to run background checks. And there's a massive surge of people going to get weapons to defend themselves because they're freaking out, and we all thought we were going to die already. So this, of course, flooded the FBI with background checks. And in 2020, the most recent year for which complete data is available, 45,222 people died from gun-related injuries in the United States, according to the CDC. However, the rate of gun deaths, taking into account population growth, remained below levels. But so the thing is that this is why you guys need to understand the numbers. When you look at that, you're like, okay, well, 45,222 people dying, but it's lower than normal levels. That sounds really good. Well, remember, we were all in lockdown. So that's in lockdown that we see that the mass shooter there, that the gun deaths dropped. It's not.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the thing. I think there was no school shootings because there was no fucking school. and there was no or very fewer mass shootings because everyone's fucking inside.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, so when you're hearing, depending on the side who's writing the article, you hear that, you're like, it's not so bad. Then you go, wait a minute, we were all locked up March, April, May, June of 2020. So let's talk about private gun sales. And this, again, gets nasty. So the law requires, again, that if you have an FFL, you need to do a background check. However, the law also rules out a requirement for an FFL license to sell if the person, quote, makes occasional sales, exchanges, or purchases of firearms for the enhancement of a personal collection or for a hobby, or who sells all or part in his personal collection of firearms. So what this means is that most private sellers and most casual gun sales, for the most part, require no license. And because they are actually done under the scope of the background checks, we actually have no good data on how many of these type of sales go on each year. And we don't necessarily know who these people are getting guns to, who the people are selling guns to. And we have no idea how many times this happens. All of these numbers are based on data that we could get to the best of our ability from the research that I've done. Private sellers, though, are not permitted under federal law to sell guns to someone, quote, they know or have reasonable cause to believe is prohibited from possessing the firearm under federal law. But again, they're not under any obligation to vet the purchaser's ability to actually buy the gun. And so there's a survey that found recently that 22% of gun owners reported having purchased their most recent gun through a transaction that did not require a background check. Remember what we talked about of Americans having, I think it was 1 in 11 Americans have over 5 guns. And then at least 22% say that they got their most recent weapon without having a background check. And so there is still a lot of non-background checks that are going on. Now, a number of states, though, have implemented additional background check requirements that cover at least some private sales. And those states include the ones that are the most populous, which would be like California, New York, and Illinois. And it is illegal for a private seller to sell a gun to someone who is not permitted to own a firearm. However, there is no way to track it, and there is no way to hold those people accountable, even if they happen to know for a fact that the person has a felony and probably should not be in possession of a gun. And most of the mass shootings we talked about were AR-15 or AR-15 style weapons. What is the AR? What's the history of the AR? So AR stands for the name of the original manufacturer, which is Armor Light Rifle. And it was available in the Sears catalog back in the day. So you could get an AR in the Sears catalog.
Along with your fridge and your...
Yeah, and your underwear and your Maytag washer. And the Armalite rifle, the AR, was originally built as a machine gun in the 1950s, but they didn't have any luck selling it to the military. The military was not buying it. And so what they did was they sold their patent to Colt. And in 1963, the U.S. military chose to use Colt to manufacture automatic rifles for standard issue to soldiers who were using them in Vietnam, in the Vietnam War. And they were called, at that time, an M16. Now, the M16s were then sold to law enforcement, and they decided to make a civilian version of the M16, and they renamed it the AR-15. And Colt's patents on the AR-15 expired in the 70s, and a whole bunch of other gun companies decided to jump in and make similar models and spin them off and name them different things. And so this is why we have the AR-15 as kind of a generic blanket term for guns that we see most oftenly used in mass shootings. So opponents of AR-style weapons, as Zoe has touched on, say that there is no need for a civilian to have the ability to kill that many people that quickly. However...
Yeah, why would you? Why do you need it in any fucking situation?
Let me answer that for you.
Okay, please do.
Yeah, but gun advocates say that these rifles are used for hunting, target practice, and shooting competitions. So the thing is that I get that part, but really hunting,
yeah, I'm gonna go shoot a deer.
Well, my God, yeah. Well, it technically would be each pull of the trigger, yeah, but it would still be firing in pretty rapid succession. And so in 1994, President Bill Clinton signed a bill making assault weapons, banning them. But in 2004, it expired. And then, of course, everybody started once again just manufacturing them, and sales went through the roof. These weapons can go for less than $1,000. Most of the deadliest shootings have taken place with AR-15 style weapons, and here is a partial incomplete list. The Las Vegas Route 91 Festival shooting of 58 plus people, the Sutherland Springs, Texas church shooting killing 26 people, the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida that left 49 dead in 2016, the San Bernardino, California shooting that killed 14 people in 2015, and the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut that killed 27 people in 2012. That's a partial list. Now, Dick's Sporting Goods, which you guys may or may not have in your wherever state that you reside in.
I love a good Dick's.
Yes. So Dick's well, you're gonna love them even more after this. Dick's Sporting Goods stopped selling the guns around 2018 and reportedly destroyed $5 million worth of assault-style weapons and semi-automatic-like rifles. And the CEO, I don't know if he's still the CEO at the time, Ed Stack, was quoted as saying, "I'm a gun owner myself." And he said, "We've just decided that based on what's been happening with these guns, we do not want to be part of the story," end quote.
Excellent.
And yeah, and I commend that.
I love Dick's.
Yes, yay, Dick, woo!
Woo!
We all love Dick.
We all love Dick.
Yes. So as stated above, the majority of gun-related deaths are suicide, and this has been this way for a long time. And in 2020, 54% of all gun-related deaths in the United States were suicide. And this is according to information from the CDC. And so suicides and guns, as Zoe did touch on, because she's more of a bleeding heart than I am, that yes, perhaps a cooling off period would help prevent some of those suicides. Now, in regards to murders, nearly 8 in 10 murders, or 79% of U.S. murders in 2020, approximately 19,384 out of 24,576, involved a firearm. On a per capita basis, which is taking into account population growth, there was 13.6 gun deaths per 100,000 people in the United States in 2020, the highest rate since the mid-1990s, but still lower than the peak of 16.3 deaths per 100 people in 1974. Now, the states with the highest murder rate per capita, based on, this is population growth per capita: Mississippi at 28.6 per 100,000 people, Louisiana at 26.3 per 100,000 people, Wyoming 25.9 people per 100,000 people, Missouri 23.9 per 100,000 people, and Alabama at 23.6 per 100,000 people.
Isn't that a lot in the South?
It is a lot in the South. Yes, and that did not go unnoticed by me either. But we see that if you just look at the gun reform that has tried to happen, most of it does not come out of the South typically. And we'll further prove that point right here. The states with the lowest murder rate per capita, again, based on population growth for the time frame that we're referencing, New York had 5.3 per 100,000, Rhode Island 5.1 per 100,000 people, New Jersey 5 per 100,000 people, Massachusetts 3.7 per 100,000, and Hawaii 3.4 per 100,000 people. Now, we have one of the highest rates of developed countries for gun death, but we have considerably less gun death than a lot of the Latin countries. And in 2020, handguns were involved in 59% of the U.S. gun murders or non-negligent manslaughters for which data is available, and this is according to FBI. And this includes guns sometimes referred to as assault weapons, and they were involved in 3% of firearm murders. Shotguns were involved in 1%, and the remainder of guns, homicides, and non-negligible manslaughters, 36%, involved other types of miscellaneous firearms. Now, we've already talked about the fact that guns travel across state lines, and because we do not have any type of federal regulation, then of course have guns will travel. So that brings me back to why I am officially against a gun ban after being 100% for guns being banned, even though I have a CCW and I'm a gun owner, is because I cannot do a financial plan for somebody if I have partial information or wrong information. And it has taken me researching this topic to realize how ineffective and impotent our government is in putting any type of the slightest skeletal structure around this gun control debate. And so I do not think that banning guns is the answer. I know that other countries have had that and they have been very successful with it. But I have completely flip-flopped my position from being 100% on a gun ban versus strong gun reform. And these are just some of the suggested ways that the federal government might be able to come in and grow a pair and try to reform guns. So across the board, standardized background checks, not you can do this and you can do that and all this bullshit. No, fuck it. Background check, you got to get it a yes or no. I don't give a fuck how long it takes. Standardized, period. A ban on high magazine guns. A ban on automatic weapons unless you're law enforcement or military, or at least increase the taxation. Now, I understand that if the assault rifle is before 1986, you still have to be able to afford it, but the tax stamp is $200. I think we could do better than that. And we've talked on this show multiple times that the way that Congress controls your actions is by controlling your pocketbook. And so anything they don't want, they just tax the holy fucking bejesus out of it. And in most cases, it helps kind of pull it as a predominant factor out of society. Mandatory gun safety training with recertifications every couple years, including how to store your gun and prevent theft or misuse of your gun. Mandatory mental checks where you have to do it every couple years. Now, I understand that the background checks that are done, they're technically going to see if you've had any type of mental issues in the past, but I'm talking about like maybe mental evaluations of some sort, which of course I know would open up a whole big door with the NRA where they would fight on the language. Right now, as of 2 days at the time of this recording, the House has presented a package of gun reform laws to the Senate, which will no doubt get declined, as Republicans have already came out and said that the language is too ambiguous and does prevent too many potential legal abiding citizens from being able to maintain firearms. So we know that's going to be dead in the water. And this is just what happens all the time. It's like kids telling their, parents telling their kids, go ask your mom, go ask your dad. We know that it's going to be dead in the water. Serial numbers on bullets. This is my own thing. I think that we need it. At least we have a better way. If we can't track all the guns that are going on, maybe we can track where the bullets came from. Obviously, there's a lot of ammunition out there right now that doesn't have serial numbers on it, but eventually that would be exhausted. That is the assumption. And so I think serial numbers on bullets, which they did propose, I think there was talk of it when Obama was in office and everybody freaked out. And then, of course, it never happened. Reinstate mandatory cooling off periods across all states as a federal law, period, and mandatory 21 years of age to purchase guns regardless of if it's a long gun or handgun, which of course again would mean that the federal government would have to step in and fucking do something. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. And there's a lot of numbers on this episode, and I do strongly encourage you guys to look at the resource links, because there's so much bad information out there that I cannot with confidence say in this country, if we banned guns, that we would have the same result as other countries. I just can't.
Can I just ask you though?
Yeah.
If the reason for not banning guns is, we don't have all the correct information and there's misinformation, what more information do you need than there are 110, from what I've heard, people a day in America that die from guns? What other information do you need? You don't need stats. You don't need anything other than that. And after one school shooting, that should be enough, because that's what it's been for other countries. And nothing good is going to come of it. Everyone knows that if you're in your own house and someone breaks in, you already mentioned it was like less than 1% of people actually get a chance to use it. And in fact, more often than not, they're shooting their own fucking children and terrible things like that. And the instances of stopping mass shootings, school shootings in particular, when you have guns, it doesn't happen. The fucking people with guns were hiding in the fucking corridor while the parents who weren't armed were going in to try and get the kids. So I'm not sure what data you need, what information you need, other than the facts.
So the first thing I would say is that the data is not clean. So when you say how much more data do you need?
Well, you don't need, but I'm saying you don't need any. All you need is the facts. That if
but the facts aren't accurate.
Well,
that was the whole thing I just talked about for an hour.
Yeah, no, I know that. But I'm talking about the facts of 19 children getting killed in a school. That's because of a gun. You don't need to know. Fuck everything else. Fuck your constitutional right to have a gun. That is all you need to know.
Says the non-American. Says the Brit on here.
Brit.
Yeah, and also just I want to qualify that the comment that Zoe had talked about, when they're shooting their own children. I did not research on that topic. I have heard that happens, but I do not have accurate numbers, and I did not research that. But yes, there has been incidents where that has happened. I would assume it is very small number, like how mass shootings get the headlines, but suicide is really the biggest gun violence.
But any number is too many numbers. In Britain, we don't have that happen because we don't have guns. We don't see guns as a constitutional right. We don't see the need to have guns. So as a result, we don't shoot our own fucking children when they're coming in late and we think they're a burglar. And there's been zero school shootings since 1996 in our country.
So I just want to point out to people watching us on YouTube that as Zoe's making all these points, her fucking headphones are backwards again. Both of them. She has them flipped upside down, so the speaker part is facing out. So
I couldn't hear it.
Yes. So Your Honor, I'm gonna move to strike everything she just said.
For the first time.
You guys, you think I'm bullshitting? Go to YouTube. She fucking sits down and her fucking headphones, she's arguing with me on gun facts. That we have enough gun facts and they're accurate enough that we should ban all guns. And she can't even have her fucking headphones on right. Go watch it on YouTube, you guys. I swear to God, it's there.
But there you go. I'm a fucking attorney. I'm well fucking educated. I'm smart. And I can't put a pair of fucking headphones on. So there's absolutely no way I should have a fucking gun.
Right, unless everybody has to prove proficiency, which is back to my point.
Prove proficiency. How about just don't have them?
Again, I'm going to strike everything that she said after that. But as usual, Zoe and I are on two sides of the fence. So that is going to conclude all of my research that I've done. Zoe has a couple closing comments. But again, I really encourage you guys that whatever side you think you're steadfast on, take the fucking time and do the research, because it could affect your children. It could. I mean, it could be the difference between your children being killed in a mass shooting, whatever that definition is, or it could also mean the ability of somebody who is a good guy with a gun to stop a mass shooting. Each of those things are valid. Zoe shaking your head, watch it on YouTube. Each of those things are valid arguments, and until I have clean data, I am no longer, period, for the banning of guns. So, and Zoe is sickened by that. By the way, Zoe didn't know this going into this, because we talked about it before we did it. We're like, yeah, fuck it, we're all banning guns. And then I did the research, and I was like, no.
You don't need research. The research is unnecessary. For me personally, and I told Mel this off previously, yesterday there was a hard lockdown at my eldest son's school. He's at summer school, hard lockdown. I have never drove so quickly to that school. I was fucking petrified. And it was, as it turned out, a hoax social media threat that there was someone with a gun near or on the campus. Now, there were kids in there that were hiding under desks, hiding in closets, sending texts to their mum saying, if I don't make it, I love you. That should never be anywhere near normal. And the fucking terror I felt driving to that school, and I got him and we left as one police car was pulling up. By the end of it, there were 20 police cars outside that high school. It was all taped off. Kids were being evacuated from that school and the middle school next door. How? This isn't normal.
And so we're gonna wrap up this episode with Zoe covering a couple things that have happened since we recorded. And then, like I said, we will be recording as soon as we can, but we want to tackle really heavy topics, and we want to do a lot of research, and we want to make sure we cross all of our T's and dot our I's as much as possible. And like I said, these will be broken up so you guys can enjoy it at your leisure. So what have they missed, Zoe?
Okay, well, you have missed a lot of shit while you've been busy shooting each other up. Okay. First of all, the Eurovision Song Contest. Fucking adore it. We've done an episode about it. It's not stupid. Anyway, Eurovision Song Contest. Ukraine won. How fucking cool is that?
I mean, really? Did Ukraine really win, or is it because they're being invaded?
Well, that is the reason, and they didn't win on judges' votes, but they won on the public vote. But more importantly than that is that United Kingdom became second. Now we haven't come that good I haven't come that good in a long while. But they haven't come that good in a long, long while. So that's number one, Eurovision. Listen to our episode on Eurovision, and it is, oh God. Oh, and then you fucking Americans had your own version of Eurovision, I guess, recently.
Which made me so fucking nauseous and sick, by the way. Like, I was really sad to be an American when I saw that America had ripped that off and tried to make it their own. Like, keep that shit in Europe. It's all awful.
What makes me laugh is that you would say that you felt really sad to be American about that, but you don't want to ban guns.
Because those are clean facts.
These are clean facts. People get killed by guns all the time. But okay, anyway. The other thing you may have missed as an American is that the last week was the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth II. It was her Platinum Jubilee, which means she has been the Queen of England for 70 fucking years. It was a Platinum Jubilee, which, of course, apparently it's called the Platy-Jubes, if you're fucking like cool. So the Platy-Jubes happened last year. Oh, I forgot to post a picture, but I will. There's a picture of me and my little sister at the...
Oh, God, not this picture.
Yeah, it's so cute. I'm so fucking cute. At the Silver Jubilee. So, anyway, music-wise, there was a big concert. There was lots of concerts, but they had a concert where the Queen was playing and Diana Ross, and apparently Rod Stewart did the most awful rendition of Sweet Caroline. So, there you go. Mel's gone quiet now. She's like, I don't care.
Yeah, no,
I mean, my Queen.
Yeah, no.
It's the Platy-Jubes, bitch.
Well, when Rod Stewart performed here in Vegas, he was amazing. So maybe he just doesn't give a shit about his country.
Apparently, I mean, the internet blew up about how fucking shit it was. Finally, sadder news. Musicians are dying all the time, and, you know, that's part of getting old, as apparently Mel is. But
Zoe's older.
Very recently, last week, I think, Andy Fletcher of Depeche Mode passed away, and his cousin was one of my friends growing up at school. Joanne, peace out. Because she was his cousin, managed to get us free tickets to go see him back in the 90s, see them back in the 90s. It's very sad for you and your family, Joe. But yeah, that was just a shock. He was only 60, and I'm a big Depeche Mode fan, and our very close friend Dr. J is also a very big, he's a huge Depeche Mode fan. So what we thought we'd do is we'd have some kind of episode on Depeche Mode where me and Dr. J would talk about the D-mod.
And if you guys have any feedback on the new format, go ahead and send it in. We are all doing everything we can to keep the show informative and not be boring. And I know sometimes when we talk about numbers, stuff gets boring. I mean, because personally, I'd rather hear about numbers than the Queen's Jubilee, but whatever. So with that, we will see you guys next time we drop an episode. Give us any feedback. Will you please rate and review us, you guys? I see you're listening. I see the downloads. There's no reviews, and it will really help us out, and I don't ask enough. And of course, check out our YouTube channel, and you can check me out on TikTok at FTOFW_podcast. Follow Lily Lou Mittens on Instagram. Follow us on all of our social media. And with that, we're out. This bitch. Bye.
Bye. Cheers.
Thanks for listening. If you like us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.